When we cut fabric, we make a pile of offcut strips called strings. And they pile up and up and up and take over your sewing space. And I call that pile Mount Scrapmore. Here are 6 fast and easy string blocks that will burn through your pile, and you'll have a lot of fun doing it. So stick with me and I'll show you how to do it. Hi, I'm Karen Brown of Just Get It Done Quilts. I do tips, tricks, and strategies to help you make the quilt that you want to make. So today we return to Mount Scrapmore for some fast and easy blocks to use up your scraps. My second SCRAPBUSTER video was about scrap sampler blocks, and they used up the large pieces of scraps. Today we're going to deal with some of those medium-sized pieces, specifically talking about strings, which is another term for those offcut strips that accumulate when we trim our pieces or trim up our blocks. So for me, strings are pieces that are less than 2.5 inches, but more than 1 inch. Less than 1 inch, I throw them in the garbage. Now, before we get started, I have 2 important tips. 1, strings fray a lot. You want to trim them down to get rid of all those loose threads. Don't do it when you sort your strings and you store them. Do it just before you sew them. Otherwise, you'll end up doing it twice. Ask me how I know this. And the second one is start with the end in mind, specifically the size of block that you're going for. My advice is to make it the same size as a ruler that you have. Anyone will do. Doesn't matter whether it's a rectangle or a square, your 6 inch or your 9 inch. Scrap blocks are so much easier when you keep it simple. So let's start with the simplest. Sometimes this is called a coin block. It's just a stack of strings sewn together on the horizontal. You can have all your strings the same width, or you can have them different widths. I will take a stack of strings and trim them to the approximate length. Then sew them together until I get the height that I want. Then trim. You can have them straight on the horizontal, or you can let them go wonky a bit. The choice is yours. Just remember to sew straight and press. And check out my video on straight sewing and a really good ironing technique if you're unsure how to do it. You can stack your blocks into a column and make a rain chain quilt, or put several contrasting columns together. Here are a couple more variations. This block is similar to the last one, but all the strips are sewn on a 45-degree angle. I like to start with my longest strip, which goes from the top left to the bottom right. Then you add strips to either side of this. And just keep adding strips to both sides until your square reaches the desired size. There's no reason to use a header or a leader piece with strings, because we always have this little extra piece of fabric at the beginning. And when we square up, any thread knots will get trimmed off. Many people use foundation paper for this block to help keep their strings from stretching. Now you can buy them ready-made, but you can just simply use photocopy paper as well. Now when you trim, if you're using photocopy paper, trim 1/4 inch out. It's a lot easier to sew your blocks together when the seams are not covered in paper. And this block also really works well with a quilt as you go. Now, I'm not going to cover quilt as you go in this video, but if you'd like me to do it in a future video, just leave a comment in the notes below. Now, for style on this one, many quilters contrast one side of the block with the other side with different value or color. And as the blocks accumulate, these can create some very striking layouts. The other thing is sometimes people use a solid piece on one side and they only sew the other side in strips. Check out my Pinterest board on string quilts for some other cool layouts. This block starts with a square or a rectangle in the center. We sew a strip along the top, then we sew a strip along the side, and we keep adding and adding and adding. You can square the strips up after every round or let them go wonky. The choice is yours. And continue until you have a block the size that you want. And it is your choice whether you want to use the same width of strips or you want to vary them. take advantage of the block's design to contrast the ones on the horizontal with the ones on the vertical, either by value or by color. Or contrast in pairs so the L shape becomes more prominent. And don't hesitate to fussy cut when you can. And depending how you play with value, the sky's the limit on layouts. Now block 4 is the log cabin. This block starts the same as the L. You sew along the top, then you sew a strip along the side, but now we continue around and we sew a strip along the bottom and we sew a strip along the other side. And we just continue around and around. Again, it's your choice whether you want to use the same size strings or you want to vary them. Traditionally, this block started with a red square in the middle, but you can use any color. But note that using a fabric with a high contrast to the rest of the block will make the center pop. Traditionally, the top and the side contrasted with the bottom and the other side. You can also make a choice whether the red square is centered or off-centered. There are so many design layouts. Just Google Scrappy Log Cabin. This is very similar to the two previous blocks in that it starts with a square in the center. This time, instead of sewing in the round, we sew in pairs. So we sew a strip to the top and the bottom, then we sew a strip to the two sides. And traditionally, there is a strong contrast between the top and the bottom and the two sides. I usually make the choice to make the pairs the same fabric and the same width, but you can do whatever you want. I also like to fussy cut or use a smaller block for that starting square. An alternative layout is contrasting a round of 4 with another round of 4 in two different values, which results in squares in squares. A quick Google search will show you all the hundreds of different layouts. Now, block number 6 is a braid. The beginning is a little bit tricky, so pay attention. So we start with a square. I use a 5-inch charm square. And the key point here is you need to work in pairs of the same width. We sew one to the left side, then we sew one to the right side. If we lie a ruler here, we want to be able to line up all these intersections. We continue by adding pairs of strings, and it's okay if the pairs are different widths. The reason why they have to be the same size is so that your braid runs straight. So after every pair, test with your ruler to be sure it is intersecting all these points. When your block is as wide as you want it to be, trim up the sides. Now, this is the wonder of this block. You just continue to add the strings until the block is the length that you want. And just continue to make sure that center line is straight. So this is something that you can add to over time. I like to make these braids the height of a quilt. I just add it as a rain chain to a back of a quilt when I need it, but you can make the whole quilt out of these braids as well. Now there's lots of variations to these blocks. Every single one of them, you can sew the strips wonky, you can make curves with them, you can sew them with pieces. Instead of using a square, you can use a pentagon or a hexagon or even an octagon. But I'll get into that in my next SCRAPBUSTER video on improv blocks. And when I make it, I will put a link up here. Remember, don't wait till your scraps are overwhelming. Choose 2 to 5 block styles and work on them a couple of times a month, and you'll keep your Mount Scrapmore under control. If you want to watch some other videos in my SCRAPBUSTER series, I'm going to link it here. This is where I get off the trail. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. Click that bell if you want to be notified when I make new videos. You can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest at Just Get It Done Quilts. So take care, and I'll see you next time.